Hi, everybody. Welcome to another elder-led devotion from HFC. So today we're continuing through our series walking through Colossians, and I'm going to be looking specifically at Colossians 4, verses 2 through 9. And I thought this one was interesting because even though it's a relatively short passage, Paul just touches on a few just really foundational elements of our faith and things that we talk a lot about at HFC. And so I thought it was neat how these are illustrated there. He kind of walks us through first just the importance of prayer, um, then sharing our faith with others, a bit on evangelism, and then last, just a little bit of a window into community. And so I thought it was neat just how, Paul touches on each of these here. And so let's first read through the passage and then we'll unpack it a little bit further. So again, it's Colossians chapter 4, verses 2 through 9, and I'll be reading from the English Standard Version if you want to follow along. So it says, "Continue steadfastly in prayer, being watchful in it with thanksgiving. At the same time, pray also for us, that God may open to us a door for the word, to declare the mystery of Christ, on account of which I am in prison, that I may make it clear, which is how I ought to speak. Walk in wisdom toward outsiders, making the best use of the time. Let your speech always be gracious, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how you ought to answer each person. Tychicus will tell you all about my activities. He is a beloved brother and faithful minister and fellow servant in the Lord. I have sent him to you for this very purpose, that you may know how we are, and that he may encourage your hearts. And with him, Onesimus, our faithful and beloved brother, who is one of you. They will tell you of everything that has taken place here." So, like I said, Paul starts off talking here about prayer, and prayer is just such a foundational element to your relationship with Christ. And what Paul is calling us towards here is continual prayer. Um, Absolutely, as believers, we are called to devote ourselves to prayer, and it's just such an essential element to our spiritual growth. It was interesting as I was reading about this passage and some other sources, I saw that prayer is compared to breathing, in that it's vital to our spiritual health in the same way that breathing is so critical to our physical health. And I just believe this to be so true. I know it's not always easy, but a goal of mine is to not just pray when I wake up or pray before I go to bed, but to try and maintain that continual prayer throughout the day. Um, and it's interesting because I know that God is present with me throughout the day, and so to the extent that I can manage to maintain that continual prayer, I can be aware of that presence, which just provides such an incredible perspective for the day. So I think that's so important for us and really does contribute to our spiritual maturity and really just that intimacy and growth with God. What's interesting is next Paul requests prayer for himself. Essentially, he prays for opportunities to share the gospel and that he would be able to do so clearly when the opportunity arises. And so I think even though this is a prayer request that Paul is making for himself, I definitely believe that this is something that each of us as believers are called to be praying for ourselves as well, for opportunities to share the gospel, to share where we're finding our hope with others, with those who don't know Christ. And I know for me, uh, verses like this, passages like this always strike a chord because I often do find myself longing to do more of that, to have more opportunities or to take advantage of those opportunities I have to share Christ with others. But of course, it's really easy to go through each day without focusing on that and getting distracted by other things. And I know that's definitely what happens to me. And so I think a really critical first step is to pray a prayer like this for ourselves. I think that's perhaps one of the starting points for us to make that happen. And I know for myself, maybe for a lot of us, the important next step is to then act on those opportunities. When God answers this prayer, as He definitely will, um, we need to take those steps in boldness and encourage as the Holy Spirit nudges us and gives us those opportunities to share our faith with those around us. From there, I think, related to living as a witness of Christ to others, Paul then gives some instructions on how to act in public. He says to walk in wisdom, making the best use of the time. And I think in large part, this is just further encouragement to both live as a witness of Christ, but also to make use of every opportunity we have to point others towards Jesus. This is really an extension of the prayer Paul has already described, and I think something that does come more naturally for us as we incorporate it into our prayer lives as well. So I think this is something that, Paul moves into this, how we are to act next. But I think it's neat that he opened with the importance of prayer, because I think prayer, excuse me, is still the foundation of that. I think also as we grow in spiritual maturity, we're also further equipped to share our reason for hope and answer questions about our faith as they arise. I know in our community group and the couples group, we've been working through a study that addresses some of the common questions people have about Christianity. And that's been a really interesting way to think about how to approach those conversations when they arise too. Even if it's stuff that we've thought about before, or maybe are familiar with, I think it's interesting as we talk about it with those we're in community with, it kind of keeps it more top of mind, so that, yeah, when those kind of conversations, those opportunities present themselves, it's stuff that's kind of familiar to us and that we've been thinking about and working through with other believers. Lastly, it's interesting, Paul makes reference to Tychicus and Onesimus. And I know typically when I read these parts of Paul's letters, I often just think of them as being very specifically for the Colossians and mainly just applying to them. And of course, they do directly apply to the Colossians, and they include some practical instruction. I thought it was interesting also as I was reading some of the sources describing this passage. I thought it was interesting that Paul is also demonstrating his care and concern for those he is close with here. In reading just the words he uses as he talks about these people, you can tell he really cares about them and that he's close with them, that he's engaged closely in community with them. I think it's interesting because we speak a lot about the importance of community at HFC. And here, just in a couple of simple verses, Paul is giving us a window into some of his community at the end of the passage. And yeah, like I said, the way Paul speaks about these people, it's clear that he's close with them, both personally and in ministry. And I think it's a pretty cool example of community that's just centered around Christ. It's pretty exciting to think about having people in my life that I'm that close with, and not just that close with in terms of personal relation, but also close with in terms of, or having those relationships be really centered on Christ and what we're doing to serve Him and kind of live out our faith. So I think, yeah, even though they're just short, very simple verses, I thought they're pretty neat examples there. I know that, yeah, that's something that I definitely want to continue striving for having that type of community, to just build each other up and encourage one another as we go out and we share and we do what God is calling us to do. And yeah, I think as Paul mentioned at the start of this passage, and I've mentioned as well, prayer is just so foundational for all of this. I think prayer is the starting point, and that continual prayer that Paul talks about is just so key in developing that spiritual maturity, which brings, to fruit how we act when we're out in public, and also I think opens our eyes to the opportunities to share the gospel, and also I think motivates us to, and brings us into community with others as God is leading us through those prayers. So anyhow, that's my encouragement for us this week. Thanks so much for tuning in.